really encourages us to maintain privacy in our life and the benefits of that. And what we're going to be talking about today is something a little bit different, but I think it's really an interesting topic. What we're going to be exploring is how Judaism dictates us to act in our transactions, specifically in our financial transactions, in shopping and selling. And it's interesting because, we're going to go through some scenarios and see what the Torah would say to us regarding these scenarios. But just, to understand that the Torah gives us certain values and certain moral and ethical laws that we choose to abide by. And when we do, it holds us to a very high standard, but it also makes us more.
Can you move the car? I want to.
One second, I'm just going to mute everyone. I'm actually not the host, so if everyone could mute themselves, that would be really great. And what we're going to do is, if anyone has any questions or would like to share something, I always appreciate that. So you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask those questions. But for now, I guess we'll just mute everyone, if possible. Thank you. So welcome, ladies, and we're going to begin. Just to understand how, we introduced the topic that we're going to be exploring, Judaism's take on shopping and selling, and the ethical laws of the Torah when it comes to these things. Now, of course, this is a really big topic, and a lot of Jewish law discusses, ethics when it comes to buying and selling. But we're just going to be discussing a few specific examples and a few specific laws. And I think that they're pretty practical, and it just, even, understanding these laws will make us realize how much more there is when it comes to, following the Torah law when it comes to shopping or selling. So just to introduce the idea that, we might think, why are we bringing up transactional laws and finances when it comes to, this is a class on Jewish values, but we may think it's enough to just follow the law of the land where we're living. There are laws in place regarding theft and to protect a person's property, but what we're going to realize from this course is that sometimes just following the laws of the place is not enough, because we need a higher moral code to hold us to a higher standard, because people will often get away with things and do things that just become normal. And really the Torah says, no, we have to maintain our integrity and follow these laws. So just to open up, I'm gonna read a few examples, a few scenarios, and what we'll do is either in the chat, you guys can, ladies, you can write your opinion. You can write yes or no if you think that this is more morally okay. And if anyone is comfortable, anyone wants to unmute themselves and share why they have that opinion, that would be lovely as well. So I'm going to read some scenarios and then we'll discuss a little bit. So the first scenario is, Jane's neighbor is moving and needs to sell his washing machine. Jane tells the neighbor, I know the machine is worth $500, but I will only take it if you give it to me for $200. The neighbor agrees, explaining that he does so because he is in dire need of the cash. Is Jane's behavior appropriate? So you can either write yes or no in the chat, or if anyone wants to share, their opinion. Do we think that this is morally okay to, kind of find that bargain? And at the end of the day, the seller is losing out, but are we allowed to, according to the Torah law, do you think we would be allowed to, bargain like that? So I see one yes. It's less than half and feels like taking advantage. Good. Anyone else want to share? And then we'll move on. So all of these questions are, they're thinking questions. They're meant to get us to start thinking about the topic. And towards the end of the class, we will address them specifically and understand, what the law behind them is and how the proper way to act would be. Okay, so the next example is Sarah spies a diamond ring at a local garage sale. The price tag says $10 or best offer. Clearly, the seller thinks it is a crystal toy. Would it be appropriate for Sarah to feign ignorance and buy it for $10? So if you know that an item is worth a lot more than it's being sold for, and the seller is unaware of that, is it allowed? Are you allowed to pretend like you don't know the truth and buy it for that cheaper price? So Marlene says no. Anyone else? No. Okay, so we're getting some no's. Good. Okay. Let's do one more. This one I'll just give an example. I'm sure some of us have dealt with this in the past. Every store has its own return policy, right? So how does it work with return policies? Are we allowed to buy something? Let's say I need, a certain pair of shoes for one event, right? And I know that I'm never going to wear them again. Can I wear them and then return them? Can we, buy something with the intention of returning it? So we're getting some no's. So these are all good. So thank you guys for sharing your thoughts. These are all scenarios and examples of situations where the law doesn't necessarily tell us what to do, and it would have to come from within. It would have to come from a person's own moral and ethical principles. And so what we're going to try to understand is, why is it that we can't follow the law when it comes to these things? Why is it that people get away with certain things because it's not enforceable? And there's a story, a beautiful story of Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, who was one of the Hasidic masters, and he was known for always being an advocate for the Jewish people. And someone just said in the chat, I know in reality we would all want to do these things, however, morally they are wrong. Yes, that's exactly what we're going to be discussing today. So back to our story, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, he would always find ways to speak positively about the Jewish people. And he would advocate to God on behalf of the Jewish people. And so it once happened that it was Passover, and he lived in the Soviet Union. He lived in Tsarist Russia in the 19th century, I believe. And one Passover, he went to one of his students, and he said to his student, I want you to find me Turkish tobacco. Now, at that time, the Tsar had outlawed Turkish tobacco. He was at war with the Turks, and he outlawed this type of tobacco. And so Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev says to his student, please go find me this illegal Turkish tobacco. And the student goes, he searches the whole ghetto, and he cannot find anything. He comes back to his teacher and says, I'm sorry. He says, I can't find any, it's illegal. And Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev says, no, I want you to go find it for me. Do whatever you can to find it. And so the student goes on the black market, and he finds this Turkish tobacco, and he brings it back to his teacher and says, here, I was able to find it illegally, black market, undercover, I got it for you. And then this rabbi, Reb Levi Yitzchak, says to his student, okay, now go and find me a piece of bread from one of the Jewish homes in the ghetto. And the student says, Rabbi, that's impossible. It's Passover. How am I ever going to find bread in a Jewish home? It's Passover. And the rabbi said, just go look, see if you could find me a piece of bread. And the student goes, and he searches, and he goes through every single home, and nothing. He cannot find a single piece of bread. And there was no black market for bread on Passover. And so he comes back to his rabbi, and he says, I couldn't find any bread because it's Passover. And at that point, the rabbi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, smiles and he looks up to heaven and he says, Almighty God, look how special your people are. Look how beautiful your Jewish nation is. That the Tsar outlawed this type of Turkish tobacco. And yet he has soldiers and police guarding and looking ready to punish anyone who is possessing this illegal substance. And yet I was able to find it on the black market through different methods. I was able to access this illegal substance, even though the Tsar has people ready to punish anyone who is breaking the law. And yet you, God, commanded the Jewish people not to eat bread on Passover. And there are no human law enforcement ready to punish us for eating bread on Passover. And yet, no matter what, I could not find bread. And what happened here, I think it's a beautiful story that this rabbi was always advocating for the Jewish people. But the idea here is that why were the people, able to break the law when it came to the Tsar's law? Because they didn't resonate with the value behind the law. So the Tsar was at war with Turkey, and therefore he made this law. But the people of the land didn't resonate with the law. There was no value behind it for the people, and so they broke the law, even though there was enforcement against it, and they could be punished. It didn't matter because the fact that there was no value to it for them. It wasn't part of their morals not to have this type of tobacco, so they broke it. And when it came to eating bread on Passover, the Jewish people, that was something that resonated with them. That was something that was meaningful to them. And therefore, even though there was no one to enforce the law, they kept it regardless because it was something that was important to them. And the idea here is that a law without a value behind it it's not effective. And if we want to be, if we want to have integrity and we want to interact with each other in an honest way, we really have to understand the values, and specifically the Torah values of honesty and integrity, and how that applies to buying things and as well as selling things. And another example of this is, during the Prohibition era in the United States, where they outlawed alcohol, right? They say that was when the most alcohol was sold, because if people don't resonate with the law, they're going to find ways to get around it. And that's what we see. There's a lot of laws. There are a lot of things that are illegal that we find a way around that everybody breaks, right? Most people will drive 5 miles over the speed limit, 10 miles over the speed limit, right? Because we think we know we'll get away with it, and we know that it's not a big deal. We rationalize that it's not a big deal, and so everybody does it. But if we truly want to be honest and we truly want to be true to who we are and true to our Jewish values, we have to understand what those values are and how they empower us to act. So we'll touch on some of the issues, and we'll get back to those scenarios towards the end and answer them and see if we can figure out what the Torah perspective is. So the main idea when it comes to honesty and integrity in Judaism is this idea of deception, that we are not allowed to deceive another person. And as long as there's no deception, it is morally and ethically okay. So on both sides, there has to be no deception from the side of the buyer and no deception from the side of the seller. So if I sell you a yacht for a nickel, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as I know the true value of the yacht and you also know the true value of the yacht, and no one was coerced into this transaction and we fully agree to it. As long as there's no deception, even if the price seems absurd, even if it's an unfair price, as long as there's no deception and both sides are fully consent, according to Jewish law, that is fine. So we spoke about the bargain, right? When it comes to bargaining, it's tricky, because if both sides know the price of the item, and there's no deception taking place, then it's allowed according to Jewish law. So deception is really the most important thing when it comes to these determining if something is allowed or not. But interestingly enough, in Judaism, we think of deception as, or stealing, right? Theft is something physical that stealing something else, an object or property from someone else. But in Judaism, we have this idea, it's called Genevat Das, which means it literally translates as stealing someone's mind. And the idea of Genevat Das is like misleading somebody or, misleading somebody into something that they are unaware of. So if somebody is unaware of the reality of a situation and you mislead them, that would be considered Genevat Das. So the Rambam explains what is Genevat Das. He says that speaking in a smooth-tongued way, right? So manipulating somebody would be considered Genevat Das. That means that according to Judaism, that would be considered a type of stealing. It's like an intangible stealing. What you're doing is you're taking their part of their mind, right? You're taking a part of their mind that they're unaware of, and you're misleading them on that premise. And the example that the Rambam gives is really interesting, I think, because it's something that we don't think of as wrong, right? We might, we justify it and we say that's not wrong. What the Rambam says is an example of Genevat Das would be inviting someone over to your home for dinner and knowing that they're going to be out of town, right? So if I know that you're going to be out of town on Tuesday and I invite you to my house for dinner Tuesday night, that would be, the Rambam says, that would be Genevat Das. What am I doing? I'm trying to win your favor, right? I'm trying to make a good impression of myself and thereby misleading you to think that I am something that I'm not. And according to the Rambam, this also applies to, offering somebody a gift that that they won't receive, that they can't accept. That would be considered Genevat Das. That now, of course, this means if you really don't know that somebody's going out of town, or even if you're unsure, like maybe they'll be able to come, maybe not, of course, you're allowed to invite them and see if they're available or not. The Rambam specifically talking about if you know for sure that this person is not going to be able to come, or this person is not going to be able to receive the gift, and you're doing it for the purpose of trying to make a good impression or trying to make them think that you're something that you're not. That, according to Judaism, is called Genevat Das, stealing somebody's mind. You're taking something that doesn't belong to you. You're taking their good impression, and even though it's not rightful, it doesn't belong to you. And so if this type of stealing applies to intangible things, how much more so it would apply to tangible things. And this is where we get into the idea of theft or stealing. Of course, we're not talking about outright theft. We're talking about the ways that people, cheat the system in order to get things. So there's two types in Judaism. In Jewish law, we have two types of deception. We just spoke of an intangible type of deception, and these are, these types of deception have practical, physical ramifications. Sorry, let's just look at the chat quickly. What about inviting someone to a wedding from far away, knowing they won't be able to come, and not wanting to insult them? So of course, this is where Judaism really takes into account our intention. Unlike, great question, Janet. According to Judaism, our intention when we act matters, right? In secular law, they can't prove your intention, right? So if you do something, we're judged based on our actions. But in Judaism, our intention does matter. And so when a person inviting someone to your house is a good act, right? We can all agree inviting someone over, that's actually a mitzvah to invite guests. But what's the intention behind the act? If your intention is to deceive the person, you want to make a good impression, or you want them to think highly of you, then that is not okay. But if you're really doing it because you just don't know if they're going to be able to come, or if, of course, you don't want to insult them and you want to show them that, or tell them that, of course, they're invited, that's different. We're specifically talking about going into it with the intention of being deceitful. But sometimes that's the thing, it's more subtle than that, because we don't think to ourselves, oh, I'm gonna deceive this person and invite them over. We think of it as, the Rambam uses the word smooth talking, right? It's like trying to up their opinion of you, or you're trying to make an impression that really doesn't belong to you. Good question. So the two different types of financial deception in Jewish law, the first one is called mekartos, which means withholding information about an item. So the example, for example, we gave the example of the ring, right? The diamond ring at the garage sale. If you know the truth of an item's value and you don't disclose that, it goes for both sides, the seller and the buyer. That would be considered deception according to law, and it's forbidden. You are not allowed to withhold information from either the buyer cannot withhold information or the seller, especially if it's going to cause somebody financial loss. So the first thing is if an item is damaged, if an item is being displayed as something that it's not, that is considered deception according to Jewish law, and it is forbidden. The second type is called ona, which means overpricing an item. So according to Jewish law, very interesting, an item may not be overpriced more than a sixth of its average market value. And so if a seller overcharges, or if a buyer, right, if a buyer underpays and through misleading the person, that would be considered ona, that would be considered forbidden according to Jewish law. So if you're dealing with Jewish people, non-Jewish people, yes, this applies to dealing with any person, any transaction. Great question. Thank you for clarifying. This applies to anything, especially because much of Jewish law, of course, is for our own refinement, right? When it comes to mekartos and ona, the two types of deception, we said undercharging or overcharging, underpaying or overcharging, and lying about the true value of an item. Those things have financial ramifications, right? Somebody is losing out. You are cheating someone else of their livelihood. But when it comes to Geneva Das, that we spoke about deceiving someone, the other person is not going to know your intention. The other person doesn't know that you were only inviting them because you wanted to make a good impression on them. They don't know that. They might be flattered even. You can even justify it and say, I'm flattering them, I'm making them feel good. What's wrong? Even if it's coming from a negative place, as long as I'm making the other person feel good, why does it matter? And Jewish law says, no, it does matter. Why does it matter? Because you are lowering your integrity. By doing that, you are lowering your standard of who you are, of your own honesty and integrity. And Jewish law is there to refine us and to refine our soul and to make us into upstanding, honest people. There's being average, and then there's going above and beyond the law. In Judaism, we have this concept of going above and beyond the law, not just to keep the law to the letter of the law, but to actually go above that and say, I'm going to be overly honest or overly genuine with my interactions with people. So where does the 100% markup in stores fit in, or is this just in personal dealings? What do you mean by that, Janet?
I mean that, in most stores, any stores, Jewish owned, not Jewish owned, observant Jewish owned, there's, whether it's 100%, whether it's 50%, but I mean, there's a sort of markup. And if you're saying a sixth, that
Right.
markups are higher. Is it different because, how does that fit in? The Jewish diamond industry in New York, anything, are they not observing the law?
Right. Good question. So I think it depends on the individual situation, for sure. We are, of course, are speaking in more general terms, but someone who's really in business or somebody who's dealing with sales would need to consult a rabbi concerning specific issues, for sure. But one thing that's important to draw back on and understand is the idea of deception. If both parties are fully aware of what they're getting themselves into, then according to Jewish law, it's usually not an issue. The problem arises when there's deception involved, when somebody is not being given the full information, when somebody is being told that this is cubic zirconia when it's really a diamond, right? That would be overcharging somebody through deceiving them, right? So that's where the problem really arises. So we'll go through those scenarios again, and I think that it brings a lot of clarity what the Jewish perspective is. So we spoke of Jane bargain hunting, right? And she paid $200 for a washing machine that was really $500. So based on what we said, do we think that this is problematic? So some people said no. Someone said yes, and someone says like it feels like taking advantage. So interestingly enough, it does feel like taking advantage, but the truth of this situation, according to Jewish law, is that she's not taking advantage because the seller had the option to sell it for that price or not. There was no deception involved. She said, this is what I'm willing to pay, $200. And he said, I really want $5, but because I need the cash, I'm going to give it to you for $2. But he had the option of not selling it to her for that price. And so Jane didn't do anything wrong by getting that bargain and by paying, that cheaper price, because there was no deception involved. Both were being upfront about the value of the item and what they were willing to accept. So in that situation, there was no deception, and therefore it's not problematic. The next was this story of Sarah. We just said buying a diamond ring at a garage sale when the seller is completely unaware that this is a real gem. And so this, according to Jewish law, would be not allowed. It would be forbidden, because by withholding information, right? Sarah didn't lie to the seller. Technically she didn't lie, but the problem is that she withheld information that would have changed the whole scenario, right? If the seller knew that this was a real diamond, he would never sell it for $10. And so by withholding that information, she is deceiving him, and that would be considered theft according to Jewish law. And the third scenario we said was of return policies. And now this is an interesting idea, because when it comes to returning, we spoke briefly about the idea of intention, right? That an action can be wrong or right based on the intention behind it. And so if you buy something with the intention of returning it, meaning you never meant to use it you never meant to keep it in the first place, you just wanted to use it and return it, that would be theft. That would be deception, because the return policy is only there in case on the premise that a person wants to buy it, see if they like it, and then perhaps return it, right? You can buy something online and know, I might want to return it. I don't know if this dress is going to look good on me or not. So I'll buy it and see what happens. That's fine. But because you are acting in according with the return policy is that you're allowed to return it if you are unhappy. But if you go into it with the intention of, I'm going to buy it, I'm going to use it once and then return it, that would be deception, and that would be forbidden. Well, that would be borrowing, Marlene. Yes. So according to Jewish law, borrowing without permission is considered theft. So it's really interesting that when you buy something with the intention of returning it, like you said, exactly, you're borrowing it without the seller's permission, because they never gave you permission to use it without the intention of keeping it. And so buying something, using it, and then returning it would be considered borrowing without permission, which is considered forbidden in Jewish law, because you can't borrow something without the person's permission. Interesting. Thanks for sharing. Yes. So there's another situation that's a bit more tricky. So we just spoke of, if there's deception involved, of course, it's not allowed. But what happens, there was this situation a few years ago where sometimes online, when selling online, there's like these different flukes or things that happen by accident, that things are sold for cheaper than their price. So I remember the situation where Elal accidentally had flights for, I think it was like $300, right? These were $1,000 flights to Israel that dropped down to $300, and it was clearly a fluke. It was clearly a mistake. So what do we think? This is really interesting. According to Jewish law, is somebody allowed to buy those flights? Those $300 flights, that it's not that, sometimes flights go down in price, that would be of course allowed, but this was clearly a mistake on their part. Somebody entered the numbers in wrong, right? They didn't mean to make those flights so cheap. So would that be allowed to purchase a flight that, or anything that is clearly the seller didn't intend for it to be sold for so cheap. It was clearly a mistake. Yeah, it would be pretty cool. I'm just reading the chat, going to Israel, I'm sure is something that we'd all have to do for that kind of price. So any ideas? What do we think? Is participating in this kind of purchase, is that, ethically allowed? Is that honest according to Judaism? I'll just wait for the chat because I see some people, it looks like someone's typing. Many times the seller will honor this error. Good. And depends if you knew it was a mistake. Good. I don't think you should take advantage of a clear mistake. Interesting. So we have a mixed bag of answers, and the answer is a mix of all of these answers actually, because rabbis were consulted in this situation because, people wanted to know, is this something that's allowed or not? And so rabbis were consulted, of course, and what they said is that because I see somebody said, Cheryl said that the seller will honor the error. Good. So the rabbis said that technically this is allowed because El has a policy, most sellers will have a policy that they honor the sale, that if somebody gets a deal, they will honor that sale. And so because El has a policy to honor their sales, you're allowed to purchase those tickets, you're allowed to use those tickets. Good. However, the rabbis did say that because there is deception involved, right? Because the seller didn't intend, he was misled or misguided and didn't intend to sell the ticket for that price. If you want to go above the letter of the law, right? If we don't want to just if we stuck to the law exactly, yes, that would be allowed because the seller is obligated to, honor their sale. But if we want to go above the letter of the law, if we want to be, super honest and real with, and stick to, being an honest person with, values, the rabbis actually said it would be better not to participate in this kind of deal because it was clearly a mistake and there wasn't their intention to sell for that price. So it's interesting that, a lot of things are clear cut, that this is allowed and this is not allowed. But when it comes to certain things, it's kind of a gray area where the rabbis say, technically there's nothing wrong, but if you want to, hold yourself to a higher standard, best not to. Lifnim Mishra Din, exactly, going above the letter of the law. Exactly. So, yeah, thank you all for sharing your ideas in the chat. Makes it all the more interesting to see what everyone else thinks of it. But, in Judaism, we see that there are certain laws, especially when it comes to following the laws of our land, right? We live in the United States and we have certain laws that dictate our lives. When it comes to honesty, integrity, buying, selling, stealing, not stealing, we have laws in place. And one can say, I can just follow the laws of the place where I live. And why do I have to have a religious or moral code that guides my interactions with people and specifically my transactions? And the idea is that the law only goes as far as it can be enforced, right? We said the example of speeding. If the cops pulled over everyone that drove 5 or 10 miles over the speed limit, they would have a never-ending job. Meaning there are certain laws that we just get away with and that therefore everybody does them and they become like unimportant, right? They become like they don't really matter anymore. Another example is people will often stream movies or apps online from illegal websites where they didn't just, to avoid paying for those movies or music, whatever it is. And because everybody does it, it becomes normal and it becomes, oh, it's not a big deal. They can't enforce, because these laws can't be enforced, they become somewhat unimportant. And Jewish law says that, in Judaism, we said that intention matters, right? But intention, of course, is not something that you can prove. It's not something that you can enforce. You can't enforce someone's intention. You can't prove what their intention was. And so how can Judaism tell us what the right or wrong intention is? And the idea is that when it comes to the laws of a government, let's say, they can only create a law that is enforceable. If a law is not enforceable, they have no say. But the Torah was given to us on the premise that we want to connect to God and we want to do the laws of the Torah in order to become better people and in order to refine ourselves. And so when the Torah says, yes, there is a certain intention that is okay, and there is an intention that is not okay. And the Torah will dictate things that are completely unenforceable, right? Like we said, the story of the bread on Passover. Even though it was not being enforced, right? There were no soldiers going around making sure that the Jewish people weren't eating bread on Passover. Because we aligned ourselves with the values of the Torah, those values were being kept. And when a person really, truly, understands and appreciates the values of the Torah, it doesn't matter that those things are not being enforced because that becomes your value system. And so the laws of the Torah do pertain to parts of our life that nobody sees or that everybody does. It's not a big deal. Everybody does it because the Torah says, if you want to be a refined, honest person with a sense of integrity, these are the ways that you may, these are the ways you may act, and these are the things you may not do. And that's the idea of halacha. Jewish law is all about connecting to God through our day-to-day lives. In every aspect, every detail of our life, we have opportunities to act in accordance with halacha, with Torah law, which shows us and how to be better people and refine ourselves. Another example, we said, but a lot of this was interpreted by rabbis in the Talmud who were men who reflected the patriarchal societies and times they lived in. So this is a whole nother topic in and of itself, which is very interesting, about how the laws were developed. And, just quickly, I'll explain that the Torah has two parts, Marlene. There's the written Torah and there's the oral Torah. And so the oral Torah was given to us by God at Mount Sinai, but it's kind of like a code book where a lot of the laws that we follow are not explicitly written in the Torah in their details. And we needed the oral Torah, the rabbis, to come and explain those laws and make them practical for our lives. And that's a lot of the Talmud. Like you said, a lot of the Talmud, a lot of the Mishnah is the rabbis expounding on these laws and telling us what God wants from us. But, in Jewish law, we believe that, the prophets and the people that gave us these laws were acting with a divine energy and they were holy men and they were righteous people, and therefore they weren't just making things up. They were, of course, tapping into their deep understanding of the Torah and what God truly wants of us. But that is definitely a big topic to be discussed. Just the idea of what the intention is, right? Something interesting another example of this would be going into a store, right? Let's say you want to make a big purchase for a certain electronic, right? You want to buy a laptop. Are you allowed to go into Best Buy and, they have in Best Buy, they have like those store representatives that will help you, tell you all about all the different models and explain all the information to you. So if you don't know much about laptops and you want to purchase a laptop, can I go into Best Buy and talk to one of the representatives and have him show me all the different models if I have no intention of buying it at Best Buy? I know that Amazon has a better price, right? I know that Amazon sells it for $100 less. I already know I'm buying it on Amazon, but I want the full rundown on all the different models. Can I go into Best Buy with no intention of buying and, have a nice 25-minute chat with the representative and have him explain to me all the different types of laptops? So Cheryl says no. And yes, you're exactly right. According to Jewish law, that would be genevat das. Like we said, it would be misleading somebody to believe, right? The store representative thinks that he's assuming that you really want to buy the laptop. And so you are taking up his time, whether it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you are taking his time, misrepresented. You are pretending that you're coming as if you want to purchase a laptop, and that's not the case. And so that would be Genevat Das, yes. It would be not allowed by the Torah. And so that, of course, is an example of something that is unenforceable, right? Nobody knows your intention. Who knows? Maybe you really are considering buying the laptop at Best Buy. Nobody knows. But if your intention is pure, if your intention is, I don't know, maybe I'm gonna buy the laptop at Best Buy, then that's fine, you're allowed to. But if your intention was never to buy the laptop from him, then it doesn't matter if that can be proven or not. For your own integrity, for your own moral code, that would be not allowed according to Torah. So, right, even if the salesman doesn't make the money on the sales, but it's actually kind of stealing from his boss, because the owner of the business is paying him per hour, right? He's giving him hourly wages. And if you're using half hour of his time, that's stealing from, the person who's paying him, who really needs him to be working with other customers. And so it's about that, but it's also about your own, like we said, it's about our own refinement, that when a person is following halacha and refining themselves, we become more sensitive to what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, and what is the proper intention and what is not. And it really it aligns you when a person is aligned with the Torah values. It makes us more sensitive. We just spoke about 3 types of deception in that the Torah forbids us to do, but of course there are so many other types that the Torah talks about. And so when we learn about these things, little by little, we start to refine ourselves and our own behavior and how we, approach different situations. You're assuming the salesman knows what he is talking about, right? But even to go into the store and present yourself as if you are planning on buying without that intention is Genevat Das. You're misleading somebody. If you see an item in a store you own and you only want to know the price, you give falsely to the salesperson. I'm not sure what you mean, Cheryl. Do you want to explain?
Sure. If you're going into a store, if you see something, let's say you own something and you just want to see what the current value is of the item you own, and you go in and you say, oh, let me see that cup that's sitting on the shelf, and the man or the woman takes the item, hands it to you, you look at it, and you say, oh, how much is it? And you're thinking, oh, I paid $5, and they tell you it's $10, and you're just like, well, I'll need to think about it. You never really had the intention to buy it, but
Right.
you their time and their effort. It's like asking about the computer,
Exactly.
give me all the information, and you're giving them false hope for that they are going to make a sale.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. And of course, if a person is unsure, right? If you went into the store really genuinely unsure, maybe I'll buy it here, maybe I won't. That's of course okay. And if you choose not to buy it there, that's fine. There was no deception involved. It's all about intention. And that's why it really comes from looking within, right? Because nobody can tell you, oh, your intention was not pure. That has to come from yourself. And so it's really about looking at ourselves and saying, is there deception in my intention, right? Is my intention pure, or is it not so pure? And sometimes that's why, the idea of this lesson is that following the crowd, following what everyone else thinks is okay, or following what, just what the society deems as correct behavior is not always enough, right? We need laws to keep us in place, right? We need governments and laws. But when it comes to our personal interactions, we have to make sure that we are aligning ourselves with a higher power, with a higher moral code, because there are things that we we kind of trample upon, we think of as unimportant because everybody does them. But in truth, we need to understand, the Torah's value for the details of our life, for the detailed interactions that we have with each other, for the honesty in all areas of our life. And that honesty, it refines us as people, and it makes us better people, and it makes us more in tune with what the proper behavior is. I think that people are in business know that not every time they will make a sale. Right, of course. And that's 100% true. And that's why if your intention was, I want to buy a laptop, but I don't know if I'm ready to buy it or not, that's perfectly fine. You can go into any store and browse and see. But as long as your intention is that I may or may not buy something. And if you don't buy something, that's fine. You can walk out and not buy anything, and no one was deceived. They know, like you said, the seller knows that not everyone's going to buy the item, and they're willing to give you their time, even though they know there's a possibility that you won't buy it. But if your intention was to take advantage of that person, just you knew for sure, you already had it in your Amazon cart, you already knew that you're not buying it at that store, you just want to take advantage of their time, use their expertise, that would not be allowed. Exactly, good points. So if anyone has anything else to share, I think that would be lovely. But I just read something this morning that I think really applied to this lesson, and I'll share it here. Next week, we're going to talk more about charity. We're going to talk about, the Torah's value for giving tzedakah, for giving charity. But I read something this morning where has anyone ever learned the Tanya? If anyone's ever heard of the Tanya, so there's a portion of Tanya that we learn every day. And if you learn that portion every day, then over the course of the year, you complete the whole Tanya. And so this morning's Tanya mentioned something really beautiful that I think applies here. The Alter Rebbe says that there's value in giving charity daily, even just one coin. And a lot of people implement this practice, especially with kids in school, that every morning we'll give like 1 penny to charity, right? And there's this idea of giving a small amount of charity every morning. It could just be like 1 penny, 1 dime, 1 nickel, putting it into the charity box. And of course, the question is like, what's the point of making this a routine, putting a coin in the charity box every morning? Why not just, have a big donation at the end of the month or at the end of the year, an even bigger donation? What's the value in giving charity daily? And the Alter Rebbe explains so beautifully that just like anything in life, we have muscles, right? The more you work on something, the better it gets, right? When we don't use certain muscles in our body, they get weak and they lose their function kind of. And until you start to use it and build it up, that's when it starts to get stronger. And so kindness is kind of like a muscle, right? The more we work on our kindness, the stronger it gets. And so the Alter Rebbe says we refine ourselves by giving charity daily. We are refining our attribute of kindness. We're sensitizing ourselves to the needs of others. And so it's different than giving charity daily is different than just giving 1 check at the end of the year. Because when you give daily, even if it's a small amount, and even if you added up all those amounts and it ended up being the same as 1 big check that you would give at the end of the year, giving daily actually instills in us a value for kindness, and it helps us work on our attribute of kindness. And so it's like, like the muscle, if you do like 10 minutes of exercise every day is better than just doing one like 3-hour workout at the end of the month, right? Because 10 minutes every day is going to build up your resilience, whereas just doing one big, run at the end of the month is less effective. And the same thing goes with charity. The Alter Rebbe says that giving daily is important for refining our kindness and our self. And so the idea is that in every detail of our life, we can apply the Torah's values, and we can look inwards and say, is this, a morally correct thing to do? Is this an ethical thing to do? And the more we do that, the more we, pay attention to the details and don't disregard anything as being unimportant, it builds up our integrity, it builds up our honesty. And when it comes to these seemingly small interactions, like, oh, what's the big deal if I go into a store and, who will know and who cares? No one really cares. No one's going to enforce it. There's no one telling you that this is wrong. It has to come from within, and it has to come from a place of, I want to go above the letter of the law. I want to go beyond what is expected of me, and I want to be, a Torah valued person, a person that has honesty and integrity and the Torah values implemented in their life. So that's the idea of shopping and selling. If anyone has any questions, or I'm going to read through the chat a bit. What happens if you buy something, see it half price online, then what? So again, if there's no deception involved, meaning if both parties are agreeing to this price, then there's nothing wrong. So if I am selling something if I'm selling an iPhone for $1,000 and I see that it's not selling, and so I lower the price to $600 and you purchase that, that's fine, because there was no deception. I agreed to that price and you agreed to that price. Now, what's if when I was entering the numbers, I accidentally wrote 600 when I really meant to sell it for 1,000? That's when the problem arises. That's when we have to say, 1 second, is it okay to buy something when the person didn't intend to sell it for that price, right? That's like we spoke about the El Al flights. That's when the question arises. That becomes a gray area if someone wasn't fully aware of what was going on. Okay, ladies, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your insightful questions and ideas.
Thank
really
you. Thank you, Malka.
Thank you, ladies.
Malka.
We'll see you next week. Wishing everybody a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Bye.